We are going to firstly start with today's episode that's a part of a series called Scaling Scientific Startups. EIT Health Innovators Community is something that I have been a part of in the past, and I still am as a local representative. It's a community of people who are trying to build startups, who are interested in innovating in science. And we do meetups, we do trips, we do all these organizing things for people who are interested in these fields. And that's why I feel like many of you are also here. And it also felt like a natural connection between Creative Disruption Lab and EIT Health Innovators Community, because just like EIT Health Innovators Community, CDL or Creative Destruction Lab is also a nonprofit that supports startups through a mentorship program, which is objectives based. And we have multiple sites throughout the globe. And currently, the startup that we are going to be talking about is Acorai. They have graduated from the CDL Berlin Health 2023 cohort, and we are super, super proud of them. And I think that what they've achieved is sometimes quite difficult for European startups to achieve, especially in the medical device area. And that's why we decided on this being the topic. Before I hand over to Kasper, who is one of the co-founders of Acorai, to give an introduction of what Acorai does, I'm going to quickly send the link of CDL in the group as well, just in case any of you here are also founders of scientific startups and you would like to be a part of it. July 28th is the deadline, by the way, so we are quite close to it. So if you want to apply, you can go ahead. Kasper, do you want to give us an introduction of what Acorai does before we jump into the panel discussion?
Yeah, sure. And of course, we can introduce ourselves in meanwhile. So maybe I'll hand over to Filip to give a bit of background of who he is and his role in the company.
Yeah, clearly I'm the guy who wears the suit in the company. Now, jokes aside, I'm currently traveling in the US, and some of the meetings require me to have a suit. But typically, I like to wear our company T-shirt as well. But I'm the co-founder and CEO of Acorai. I've been predominantly responsible for the hardware development and the machine learning development within the company, and been with it since the start. So it's been almost 4 years now. I know what you, Kasper.
Yeah, I guess that's a good illustration of two of the many roles you gotta keep in a startup environment. So some days it's a suit on, and some days it's the company branded T-shirt. And yeah, and I'm Kasper. I'm also one of the co-founders of Acorai. I'm mainly heading up operations, being part of the company since inception in 2019. Before that, I spent roughly 7 years in management consultant companies in Sweden, as well as a few years in startup environments, both in Stockholm and UK. But yeah, I'll spend a few minutes just giving everyone a bit of a background of who we are and what we are doing to put a bit of context into this conversation. So obviously Acorai, what we've set up to develop the new standard in heart failure management. So just giving a bit of background of the heart failure domain. It is a massive global disease area impacting over 60 million people worldwide. It's also a very costly disease area. In the US, it's $100 billion a year. Globally, that number reaches $350 billion or euros. That's quite equivalent now. And the thing about heart failure is that it is a notoriously tough disease to monitor and manage in an efficient way. And this leads to a lot of unnecessary resources and unfortunately deteriorating heart function in a lot of the patients currently suffering from heart failure. Basically, what's been demonstrated in monitoring and managing heart failure patients in an efficient way is that you want to know and balance the intracardiac pressures, namely the blood pressures inside of the heart chambers. But all the current solutions in the market, they are invasive, namely require surgery, which then leads to high costs, but also a lot of time involved in these procedures, and also limits the widespread applicability of intracardiac pressure monitoring. So that's basically the nugget that we identified and what set up this company as being the inception, the need for this low cost and scalable monitoring solution. And that's what we set out to develop, and we have very much progressed on developing. So what you see here on the left-hand side is the Acorai heart monitor. It's a handheld, non-invasive intracardiac pressure monitor. So it's roughly the size of a smartphone. It's a handheld device, which a clinician, practitioner, or almost even a patient would put on top of the chest for a few minutes, after which they would receive the intracardiac pressures currently only available through invasive measures. And we make this possible through what we call the SAVE sensor system, which is the most advanced sensor combination on the market, leveraging 4 types of sensors, namely SCG, PCG, PPG, and ECG. And as mentioned, this enables us for accurate, absolute, and actionable insights for practitioners managing heart failure patients. We have done a first study in Sweden where we have demonstrated accuracies equivalent to invasive device on the market. And just to kind of frame you guys where we are in terms of timeline for our company, is that we've done this first study in Sweden, which has been successfully finalized. And now we are setting up a global replica of that study, targeting over 1,200 patients across sites in Europe, in US, as well as in Asia. This will generate enough data for us to finalize the machine learning models we are leveraging in our device, as well as sufficient evidence to apply for FDA and CE marking, targeting a market launch in 2025. You met me and Filip here shortly. We are in total getting close to, we're 13 FTE currently, as well as we have a set of consultants across varying capabilities, as well as various regions around the world. And we have strong partners globally. Here you see a few of the sites we're using. Some of our investors, as well as, of course, in the middle here, Creative Destruction Lab, which has been very supportive and very valuable help for us in the last year in formalizing our strategic approach, as well as approach for venture investments. So I think with regards to that, I'll stop there and hand it over back to you, Ashim. And maybe open up for questions about us before we head up. I don't know.
Yes, of course. I think that as Krishna has already put into the chat, if anyone has had any questions looking at the pitch, I'm sure you guys do, please put it into the chat. We will be answering them towards the end once we've sort of integrated them into the discussion. Thank you, by the way, for the shout out to Creative Destruction Lab. And I think that's a very good segue into what my question was going to be. So I remember that in one of the sessions, we were really discussing the users, like the user story, the market selection, all of that. And I remember this to be a point of discussion between the mentors and you, and it was super interesting. And you also mentioned many, many stakeholders, the patients, the doctors, the insurance companies, the hospitals. So how did you build a user story that got you all those partners, got you all the customers that you're going to be getting? And how did you select the market? Because I know that Filip is in the US right now.
I think it's, I guess in this market, like life science or medtech devices and everything, like my perspective is that a lot of these kind of companies sprung from research, right? And it's a lot of people, a lot of times people with a research background coming up with products. And I think it's very much important to kind of flip that upside down and take then the customer perspective, right? And that's basically the starting point we had in like defining our value proposition, as well as you mentioned, what our actual users are, as well as the basically their business cases as well, because and that's where we've done, I think, over 100 interviews with whether it's cardiologists, practicing nurses, health economists, and CFOs in hospital systems, as well as understanding the various systems you have worldwide as well with regards to insurance, reimbursement, and stuff like that. And I think that's probably a quite uncharted territory if you're coming from the research side of things. But I think it's very important because there are a lot of good ideas out there and solutions out there. But in the end, if you don't have a good product market fit, I think that's where a lot of these kind of companies might end up falling short. Filip, if you have any additional thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I think talk to your customers, right? It's an easy rule of life, and it works pretty well. And we've done over 100 deep dive interviews with potential customers around the world, and have come out of it, slightly more informed than we were before it, right? So I think that's just really important. I think looking back, just having a clean business model is something that we would probably spend a bit more time on the next time around before jumping into all of the kind of tech development. There is something quite beautiful about that when you see it. So but easy advice to give in retrospect, right?
I think it's one of those things that's like easier said than done. And I think almost all startups go through that. And I think the first lesson that any startup always learns is that, the user is different from the customer. And in healthcare, I think that's all the more important to look at, because sometimes your user might be the physician, which is true in your case, and the customer might be insurance providers or hospital networks. So that's quite important, in my opinion. And this is, I would say, one of the biggest challenges. But in your opinion, what was the biggest? And when I say the biggest, what kept you up at night? What didn't you let you sleep when you were creating this medical device company?
Yes. Yeah. I think every quarter has its new nightmare and a new fire to put out. In the beginning, I think it was just about building hardware is just kind of hard in general, and then building a hardware within a medical device compliant, company is even harder, and just a lot of uncertainty about how to go about it. Fundraising is always a big worry. I think it feels like we've been living paycheck to paycheck now for a long time, despite having raised, 3.5 million as of last week. So it never seems to end. I think we're now finally approaching the finish line of a larger round, which will keep us afloat for 2 years, and hopefully we can relax a bit more. But yes, it's just a constant hustle, right? I think a lot of the entrepreneurs in this that I see in this call probably feel the same. Kasper, do you have anything to add there?
Yeah, no, I was just thinking of when you were mentioning all the new hurdles coming up. I think if you would have known all the new activities and hurdles that we would have encountered throughout the years, maybe we wouldn't have set out on this journey in the beginning. No, I think that's a common thing you hear from a lot of entrepreneurs as well. You can't really plan for everything as well. I think it's just you got to dive into a lot of these things and approach it with a enthusiastic and positive mindset as well. And in that, also surrounding yourself with good people in your team as well as outside of your team, whether that mentors or advisors or investors.
Yeah, and I think that what you mentioned about raising the 3.5 million, that's honestly so amazing. Congratulations, by the way, because I just knew about the 3 million. So yes, how did you raise it? That would be my very blunt question. The more detailed question would be, going about non-dilutive raising, dilutive raising, when to apply for a grant, when to approach a VC. When you were making those decisions, Like, was there like a common factor on which basis you were deciding that? Like, okay, where is our product? Or where is our team? Was that a factor, or were you making those decisions just like on the fly? Because I'm going to give you that as an option.
I mean, I think randomness plays a big part in our fundraising strategy, to be honest. I think just embracing the hustle and just reaching out far and wide has been our strategy. We are in I guess a unique fundraising environment, or that's at least what they tell us. We've never really raised money in another environment before, but it definitely seems that investors are less willing to throw money at you, or they take much longer for their due diligence, and they need to make sure that they have co-investors who can follow on and more rounds. And I think that goes back to this, perhaps the business model story, right? They would much rather see a business model now that can get them to cash flow earlier, because that can reduce the need for finding co-investors. That's something worth considering, I guess, in this environment. But we have leveraged angel investors a lot, particularly angel investing groups that consist of former medtech executives that have experience investing in our space and know our space. I think medtech requires that. It's easier to talk to someone who understands the space. We have early on we received the backing from Bayer through the Bayer G4A program, and that was both a great market validation, but also great kind of capital for us to take on. I think interacting with strategics is one thing that we have seen. I guess we're able to kind of, how should I put it? Well, I guess we're seeing the fruits of that labor lately, right? It's been a long process of having conversations with large medtech companies and pharma companies for a long time, but they seem to play off, and I think they are becoming more active in this environment. So that's something that I would encourage, anyone in medtech to do earlier, because those relationships just take time to build, and if they see your progress over time, they build trust with you, and they see the kind of successes that you're able to achieve. So that's been a good one. On the non-dilutive side, I'll hand over to Kasper, where we've also been very, very active.
Yeah, sure. I'll just add some thoughts on like raising VC money. I think it's timing. It's a big thing as well. Like where and when you're raising, if it's a pre-seed versus seed versus Series A. There is the lovely term of the medtech valley of death, which is where we've been for a while. But if and also thinking about what kind of investor you're getting on board, because I think having experienced VCs with a broad network is also very valuable. Networks also enable introductions, which also is one of the strongest ways of getting whether that's angel investments or other VC investments. And as Filip mentioned or touching on, like the longevity in building these relationships shouldn't be. It's quite important to. It's this example of you wouldn't marry a partner after first dates. And I think that very much applies to raising money as well, where you have these ongoing dialogues for months, almost years with some VCs, and as they follow your progress and get to know the team better, they will be more comfortable in making an investment decision. So hopefully while we close our round, we will be able to take a breather, but that's usually when you should start raising or networking for our next round. And on the non-dilutive side of things, we have been quite active national and like even European grant side of things. So since we are based in Sweden and UK, we have applied for a lot of the national grants on that level, but are very active on the European grant scene, whether that's for instance EIT Accelerator or EIT Flagships. It's just to enter find the European grant platform and start searching for grants. I think it's a very, very useful opportunity. And there it's just about spending time. Some of them are quite long, but it's of course with a lot of things, Pareto, like how much you put in versus how much you get out. But I think it's also a learning exercise where you will get challenged on a lot of things, such as, business model, market sizing, value proposition. So that's also a good experience in terms of how you frame your company in a market landscape, basically.
Understood. And I think that you mentioned a few things that might have spiked the ears of our listeners. You mentioned the medtech value of debt. If anyone is interested to know what it is, if you don't know already, then write it down in the chat. Or if you want more advice on the EIC accelerator, for example, then you can also write that. My question to you would be that in this process of fundraising, what's the place of mentorship programs like CDL? Because directly some startups might not see the impact, but having gone through that, what do you think has been the biggest impact, or especially fundraising?
Well, I think and these programs all take different shapes and forms, right? I think we usually joke about being one of the more accelerated companies in the space, since we've been part of a lot of accelerators. And in that domain, it can be a bit hit or miss. My view, and I think Filip echoes this, of CDL was that it was an extremely well-identified set of mentors that was part of the program, which really had experience from the space, from our kind of company, us as a company, both from like the strategic side of things, but also investment side of things. Also having entrepreneurs who have been through the journey before, who might have exited their company and can, echo or just teach learnings. So I think CDL was very, very useful in that sense. And it comes back to us mentioning just networks and leveraging people's existing learnings. I think that's the most important part.
And maybe
and I think that, yeah. Filip, go ahead.
Well, just because this is also EIT Health related, right? I will add that the Gold Track program for us was a really, really helpful program. I know that it won't be continuing, but that was just a really helpful program in terms of defining the direction we should take as a company and sort of not dying, right? I think that was really helpful. And then I guess, for a device company, right, it's the big elephant in the room is that 80% of deals happen in the US, right? So that is where the money is. I did spend 5 months in the US fundraising, and came back with only European investors that were interested, right? So I think it is something that is difficult to do unless you're raising a lot of money, or unless you're very, very early and you're willing to make the move to the US earlier, right? I think network and community for devices in Europe is much smaller, and thanks to the CDL program, we were able to reach people who know it very well and we now have great dialogues with. But in general, it's a very small one compared to what they have in the US.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think that with CDL, I think those connections are also easier to make, especially with global programs. I think they connect you with mentors in different places, and that's honestly quite helpful. Mentors are always good for an early stage startup. Now, going back to the early stage part of your startup, you grew your team quite a bit. And I think this was also a point of discussion in the CDL program. So when you were remotely growing your team, because many people come together and they have an office and they sit down and they build the company day by day. And obviously it's much easier in that setup. So remotely, you really were able to do it successfully. So what are your learnings from that? Like, what should the company that's doing this at the remote level be thinking about? What should they establish right at the beginning?
Yeah. Again, I would say building a team is also a slightly random process. There has been for us. I think one of the unifying factors is that we are able to attract people who want to work remotely, which makes your talent pool a lot larger than it would be if you were in a physical place. And it's worked really well so far. And we meet up, once every quarter for a 3-day strategy meeting, and we get the chance to get to know each other and do sort of the whiteboard stuff, right? I think in general, it is about hiring good people who are good people, right? It's we are doing this to help patients, and I think having people who are on board for that journey and want to help patients tends to attract some good people. So I think that's been sort of a unifying factor. Clearly lacking a process here. Kasper, do you have any input on this?
No, but I echo on the identification of correct people. I think, as you mentioned, finding the right people, but also not being shy of getting rid of people that might not fit well in your company, whether that culture-wise or ways of working wise, because it's a massive difference between working in a startup environment or in a massive multinational company, right? And that might not be for everyone being a startup environment, and that's also important for the strategic fit into your company. I think also
just on that, I mean, to your point, we've had experiences of primarily clinical and regulatory people that have had great CVs, are super excited about the product, but have come from, large medtech companies and have just not been able to adapt to not having, 10 people under them to manage, right? I think we prefer having someone with startup mentality and startup grit, and then teaching them the ropes from the start, and having a longer learning phase, as opposed to hiring for skills and then maybe not that being a great fit for the environment that we're in, right?
Yeah, and just adding as well as on just like building a efficient remote team. I think one of the most important parts, it's just being very clear, having clearly defined roles, responsibilities, and expectations on your hires and their teams, and being able to follow that up on a regular basis. Especially what you're missing, it's like these spontaneous chats, right? Like the coffee machine chats. And I think on that side as well, very much in terms of what I think is one of the toughest things of building in a remote company, it's culture. And that's, as Filip mentioned, we have these quarterly strategy meetings where we meet up the entire company. We can both work hands-on with difficult problems, but we can also spend time together, have a few beers and dinner, and get to know each other. And I think that's extremely important for people's satisfaction in a job and building a longevity in organization.
I think I completely agree with that. And I think especially with scientific startups, when you have people who have been used to working in a lab environment, working together, continuously collaborating, them working in a remote environment and somehow trying to connect online, that becomes quite difficult. And I think that's a challenge that almost any scientific startup that's building remotely faces. One last question, and you can even say that we can't answer that question because Jacob, who's the CTO, is not here, because this is one of the questions that was submitted in the forums. So at what point do you go from a project to a company? So at what point do you say we are going to start applying for dilutive funding? Or at what point do you say this is going to be our equity distribution? So at what point do you make that decision?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think looking back, I think we were a bit aggressive on our cash flow outlays, and we hired some people a bit too early because we were kind of pushing the cart ahead of the horse a bit there, that we were trying to become a real company, and then we started spending more. So I think growing into it organically, and then thinking about speed, right? It's all about speed of execution. If you can speed up execution by hiring more people and thereby needing to raise more capital, then you should definitely do it, right? I think that's one of the issues with being a medtech company is that even if you have a unique product and you get a patent for it, as we have done, there is always a threat of another technology coming to the market around the corner, right? So you don't have the luxury of biotech or pharma that can rely on IP to survive for a very long time. And in that sense, you're much closer to a normal company, right? And that you have to execute to survive. And I think not being stingy about your shareholdings, but raising as much as you need to grow as quickly as possible is very important. So,
Kasper, do you want to add to that?
No, no, I think Filip covered it pretty well. About being kind of cost efficiency is quite important. Identifying the critical timelines or critical path, and understanding what resources you do need for execution on that. Obviously, this shift from a project to a company depends on what stage you're in, right? Are you able to take that step with like your own funding or friends, family, and fools, or do you want to keep it in a safe environment a bit longer? Or it's quite individual as well, right?
So what I'm hearing is it's up to the people who are building the company. That's the first thing. And also trying to build conservatively, trying to not speed up too much, but at the same time, remembering that technology defendability is not the only factor that's going to make sure that the company is successful, but also your timing to enter the market. So that's something that I think that many scientists can relate to, because this is, again, a question that I keep getting when we are recruiting for CDL as well. Should I make it into a company? I feel like this is not ready to be a company. They are always hesitant. But yeah, then the time just passes by. That was indeed a good question to end our panel discussion with. And we've also answered a question in the Q&A, which was about how CDL has helped you. We actually ended up answering it quite naturally in the flow of things. So if anyone has any questions which you had originally submitted, which we didn't answer, please put them in the chat. Or if you have any new questions, you can put those as well. In the meanwhile, maybe I can... Yeah,
one last thing.
Sure.
Just on how CDL has been helpful. And right, I think learning how to think in value inflection points and having conversations with investors continuously, and just picking their brains on what do they need to see for the company to reach another value inflection point, and then only focusing on that value inflection point, right? I think it's easy, and we have done that, right, to want to spend too much on marketing or going to conferences or doing other things. But really, at the end of the day, what investor wanted to see from us is like, okay, give us the clinical data and give us the design freeze, and that's a really solid value inflection point. So don't get distracted by the other stuff, right? And my point, CDL allowed us to talk to a lot of different, both VCs, but also people who run medtech companies before, and they are very knowledgeable in defining those value inflection points.
It kind of goes back to like what we talked about, getting to know your customer. In the same way, VCs, they are a stakeholder you need to get to know and understand. So what are their incentives? What are they looking for? And once you understand that, it's much easier to create attractive pitch decks, but also have a constructive conversation with them.
Fair enough. I think that that's a common response that we get from a lot of CDL startups, that just getting that advice, it's almost like people undervalue the advice that they get at an early stage, especially. And from CDL, it's, everything is mentorship related. In the meanwhile, while I answer Filippo's question via Kasper and Filip, please answer the feedback form that Krishna has just very nicely posted in the chat. so that we get to understand what you want to listen to, what you want to hear from us. We also already actually have a company that will be presenting next. It's called Cellbricks. They are a bioprinting company, and they also have a super interesting story via CDL. So I'm quite excited about that episode as well. The question from Filippo is that were you problem first or were you solution? Like, did you have the technology that you were already developing, and then you decided, oh, this could be applied to that problem? Or did you identify the problem and then start developing the technology?
Yeah, it was very much a problem first, and then, just scouring every single scientific publication for a few months to see what could be potential solutions, and then starting to build up a few prototypes, and seeing whether it was reasonable, right? So very much garage type of prototyping, and then ascertaining that there was market demand for it, just showing it to a very crude prototype to a cardiologist. And it's important for them to see things in real life. That's also one of those, I think, just rules on life in general, giving them something to touch. But very much problem, and then finding the solution to that problem.
Understood. I think that answers the question quite clearly. One more question is, who should be on the founding team at the pre-seed stage? And I think that's a very logistical question, in the sense that, who do you start when you're registering the company? Like, who do you start with already on the cap table? Are you supposed to have some investors as well? Are you supposed to have your university? Should you register separately and then give them equity? So, because that's a problem for many of the startups. So what's your solution for that? Who was in the team at the pre-seed stage for you?
Yeah, so it was very much the three co-founders, where I was full-time, and then Kasper and Jacob joined on a few months later, full-time. So I think it's all dependent. We all have a very technical background, right? So we are able to do a lot of the early development we were able to do in-house, which obviously saves. I think for a medtech startup, you need to have some kind of technical background, I think, too, or at least a willingness to dive into the technical aspects to be successful. So, and that makes it easier, less reliant on early stage funding. And then I think, we were very lucky to attract about €1 million pretty early on from angel investors, who just believed in us as entrepreneurs and our ability to execute. And that type of capital has its pros and cons, of course, but it was very helpful in the start, at least.
And just on I would say it's impossible to stay, it's not a one answer question who should be in the team from the start. I think it's about identifying, where your company stage and what you're doing, what are must-have people or capabilities versus nice-to-haves. Also with regards to keeping cost efficiency. And in the end, there are only 24 hours of the day. And think carefully about, what you can outsource in efficient ways as well, whether that's hiring someone or having a consultant with a few hours a week. But also with regards to keeping cash flow levels down, I think, in the beginning.
Yeah, and I think that Filip mentioned that about how you guys did hire pretty quickly. So I think that's a lesson for a lot of startups here to learn from. We do have a few more questions. We are running out of time very soon. We have 4 minutes in our schedule. One of the questions that I think many people might have is in terms of certification, because with medical devices, you always have to go through that regulatory certification part. So how did you make sure that it was as fast as possible? And in the sense, how did you accelerate it? Is the wording that the question has, but I would say as fast as possible.
You just hustle, right? I think that's you get up early and you work every day of the week, and then you take that extra meeting that you're not sure about, because I think our experience has been those meetings are the ones that seem to somehow lead to something good in the long run. So, yeah, a boring answer perhaps. I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's like doing your homework as early as possible to identify the critical path, like instead of just taking each step as it comes and then realizing, oh, I could have started this piece of work half a year earlier. So planning before execution at all.
So you're saying that project management is a huge part of medical device regulatories. And I think I agree, because with regulations, many a times there are some parallel processes which you can be running. And I would say that that's my answer to this accelerate certifications process in my experience of working with startups, that many a times startups will sit and say, we've submitted this, so we are just waiting for it now. But that's not how these processes work. You can be starting something else parallelly instead of just waiting for the government body, which is known to be late, to give some response. So just the advice would be plan ahead, project manage. So that would really help out everyone. And yeah, like one of the last questions was actually about, and I think I know the question, like I know the answer to this. I don't think that getting on reimbursable lists was a part of your market plan in the US. I don't think it's a part of your business, right? Like, what's your business model in the US would be the question.
Well, longer term, definitely. Fortunately for us, in the heart failure domain, as I mentioned, it's a very costly procedure as of now. We're managing heart failure patients, and hospitals do it at a loss. And by leveraging our device, we can reduce readmission rates as well as length of stay, which means reduced costs for the hospital systems, which means that they would be incentivized to buy our device in the first stage to reduce costs in like second and third order, right? And that's a fortunate market incentive, which we've identified in the American market, but longer term for the US, as well as most markets globally, the reimbursement route, it's the name of the game for us as well. And just getting back to that, that's also where markets differ drastically. So, for instance, in Japan, the average heart failure patient is staying roughly 10 days longer in the hospital because they're reimbursed for every night of stay, which means that reducing length of stay is not an incentive for us in the market there, while it's in the US. So it's identifying those differences in the dynamics as well. It's quite important.
And I think that that's a very good point that you mentioned. I never thought about this actually, that if you identify a problem that the system is now solving at a loss, and you provide a solution to that, then the incentive is obviously much higher. So you don't need to go via the reimbursable route from the beginning, which is, of course, a bit more difficult to get into in the US compared to EU. So that actually brings us to the end of our webinar. Thank you very, very much, Filip, Kasper. It's been an absolute pleasure. Krishna, the organizer on EIT Health Innovators side, and without whom we would not have been able to handle the logistics. So thank you very, very much. Again, just a reminder, this is not just one webinar. It's a 4-part series. The second episode is going to probably happen either at the end of July or the beginning of August. And it's also going to be super, super interesting. So yes, we will do that. EIT Health also has the next event on the 20th of July, which is just next week. And it's called How to Use AI to Live Longer and Better. So I think that some of the participants were interested in AI in medicine, and it'll be quite interesting for all of you as well. So thank you very much, everyone. Remember to fill out the feedback form, and we look forward to seeing you in the next episode. Thank you.
Visit community.eithealth.eu to join our community and shape the healthcare landscape with us. For more such videos, subscribe to our channel.